Hey, what's going on there, guys? Nick here from Absolute MTG, and today we're going to be taking a look at a budget deck for the Theros season of Standard, and it is Red Deck Wins. So, it has been some time since I've done a budget deck for this budget series, and the last one that I actually did was Red Deck Wins, but I think it was for, like, the Dragon's Maze season of Standard, so it's been some time. Like, things have rotated out because Innistrad Block is gone, and now we have Theros that just came in. So we do have some new additions, we have some new cards that we can play in this deck, and ultimately it's really cheap to build. That's the purpose of this series and showing you these decks. They're really cheap to build. You can build them for little to no money. This one's not too expensive to build on its own, but it's a building point. Like, if you have more expensive cards, you can replace things and just go and improve based on how much money you have to be able to invest in it. But before we get started with taking a look at the cards, if you guys have any suggestions for decks that you would like to see, please leave them down in the comments below. And also, the deck list is in the description, as well as a link to TappedOut.net where you guys can view this deck. And if you're not familiar with any of the cards that are in here, all you have to do is scroll over the names of them with your cursor on TappedOut.net, and it'll pop up a little image where you can read what the card does. So, to get started with our creatures in the deck, we are running 12 1-drops to start off our curve. We have 4 Firedrinker Satyr, we have 4 Burning-Tree Denizen, and 4 Rakdos Cackler. So the Firedrinker Satyr is a 2/1 for 1/4s. It's essentially a Jackal Pups, but it has a plus side to it. So whenever it's dealt damage, it's going to deal that much damage to us. That's the drawback to it. But for 1 generic and 1 red, it can give itself a +1/+0 buff until the end of the turn, and it deals 1 damage to us. So if we have like 4 mana open, we can pump him twice. He does deal 2 damage to us off of that, but ultimately being able to swing in with a bigger Jackal Pups is definitely really awesome. And especially helps us like in the mid to late game if we're just trying to grind out a win if we weren't able to do it like immediately in the early game. We have our Foundry Denizen, which whenever another red creature enters the battlefield under our control, it gets +1/+0 until the end of the turn, which is going to play off of things like Burning-Tree Emissary that we can play turn 2. So if we can chain like 1 or 2 Burning Trees into like Firefist Striker, Goblin Shortcutter, or like a Gore-house Chainwalker, then we can swing in with Foundry Denizen for like at least 3 on turn 2, which is good for us. And then from there, it's a little bit less spectacular because you're not chaining things like Burning-Tree Emissary, but it's definitely still good for being able to grind out a lot of really early life loss in the very early game. We have our playset of Rakdos Cackler as well, so essentially like a 2/2 for 1 for us. For 1 red, we are going to play him on like turn 1 or maybe even turn 2, and we get to unleash him so he can't block, but we essentially have that 2/2 for 1, which is great. We have the Burning-Tree Emissary, so 2/2 for double red for us, and whenever it enters the battlefield, it's going to add 1 red and 1 green to our mana pool. So if we have multiples, we can play them and just get a huge board state. But ultimately, we can chain it into things like Lightning Strike if we need to get rid of a creature, or Magma Jet. We can also chain it into like other 2-drops like the Chainwalker, Striker, or Shortcutter, like I mentioned before. And like if we're on turn 3 and we have another mountain, we can also play like Chandra's Phoenix. Like Burning-Tree Emissary is essentially like the Billy Mays card, where it's like that's not all. We have more that we can do, and usually we are going to be able to do that. We're going to be able to play more per turn and play into synergies, and especially like after we sideboard, because we have Fanatic of Mogis, we can build up into a pretty sizable devotion as well by playing the Burning-Tree Emissaries. We have the Firefist Striker, so 2/1 for 2, and off of Battalion, whenever it and at least 2 other creatures are attacking, we get to have target creature not be able to block this turn. So the Battalion trigger is really nice, and if our opponent isn't playing a lot of creatures, we are definitely going to punish them for that. And being able to just deprive our opponent of like any creatures that they can't block with is great. Like, especially whenever it comes to like our opponent having like a Sylvan Caryatid and like maybe another creature like Lexodon Smiter or Desecration Demon, something like that. Being able to deprive them of at least 1 blocker is great. They may be able to block with like a wall otherwise, like that 0/3 defender, but we still get to get a few hits going through, and we get to manipulate the way that the combat's going to go. And equally, we have the Goblin Shortcutter for exactly that. So it's another 2-1 for 2, and it is going to manipulate the way that blockers are going to work. So whenever it enters the battlefield, target creature can block this turn. So it's essentially like the Firefist Striker, but you only get one use out of it. But on the spot, it's definitely really nice. Like if we have both the Striker and the Shortcutter, then we can essentially have like 2 creatures not be able to block in that given turn, so that's great. But usually you're using like the Goblin Shortcutter whenever you're swinging Alpha and you're swinging for the win. So we have 2 of those to not allow our opponent to block with a creature for the turn. We have our playset of Gore-house Chainwalker, so 2-1 for 2 Unleash, and he is a 3-2 creature for 2, especially good when you're able to play him turn 2 and just grind out from there, but definitely really threatening when you have a 3-power creature on the board on turn 2. We have our playset of Chandra's Phoenix, which is pretty hard for a lot of decks to be able to deal with it. The greatest part about it is that it's a 2-2 creature for 3 with haste and flying, so the evasion definitely makes the difference in a lot of different matchups. But whenever an opponent is dealt damage by a red instant, sorcery, spell, or a red planeswalker that we control, we get to return Chandra's Phoenix from our graveyard to our hand. So if you guys happen to be playing like Chandra Power Master in like the sideboard or the main board, if you decide to put one in there, you can definitely go off of that +1 and you can get back Chandra's Phoenix. But otherwise, like our Lightning Strike and our Magma Jet are going to be the ways that we get back our Chandra's Phoenix off of our opponent using like removal or like Supreme Verdict or something like that. So it's an easy way to get back the Phoenix whenever we have burn spells in our deck that we can just also be able to deal the damage to our opponent but get back more threats that we can use against them. So the Chandra's Phoenix is great for that. It's an easy way to be able to chain like Firefist Striker as well. If we're going like turn 1 and play like one of our 12-1 drops, turn 2 we can play like Burning-Tree Emissary into Firefist Striker, or if we're just going like Firefist Striker, that way we only have 2 creatures on the board in this scenario. So we go like 1 drop, 2 drop Firefist Striker, 3 drop Chandra's Phoenix, we get that battalion trigger. So it's an easy way to kind of be able to be really aggressive with this deck. And then for the non-creature spells that we have the Lightning Strike and we have the Magma Jet. So Lightning Strike dealing 3 damage to target creature or player for 2 mana, and Magma Jet for 2 mana deals 2 damage to target creature or player. But we also get the Scry 2, which can make the difference whether we do need more land drops or we need less land drops, or if we need a particular card that's on top of our library that we're seeing off of the Scry. Ultimately, the Scry 2 does help us in being able to see what we're going to be drawing essentially for the next 2 turns, and we can kind of warp that to our liking, to our choosing at least. So we have the Magma Jet, and then for our land base we just have 22 mountains. So the reason why I went a little bit heavier, like instead of playing like 20 mountains or 21 mountains, the reason why I went with 22 is because we are playing Fanatic of Mogis, and we're also playing Hammer of Purphoros, cards that require us just to go a little bit bigger than the 3 converted mana cost curve that we top out at. So we definitely want to have a little bit more lands for matchups where we are playing like Fanatic and the Hammer of Purphoros. But for our sideboard is here off to the right. We have 3 Act of Treason, 3 Mizzium Mortars, 2 Hammer of Purphoros, an entire playset of Frostburn Weird, and 3 Fanatic of Mogis. So the way that things are going to work is like up against the creature-heavy matchups, like other decks that are running like a lot of creatures, we want to take out our Firedrinker Satyr on our Foundry Street Denizen, because those cards are really awful up against really creature-heavy decks, and we're going to side in Frostburn Weird and Fanatic of Mogis at the minimum. So our Frostburn Weird is going to be like our 1/4 creature for 2, and it's going to add devotion for us, but ultimately it's going to be a great blocker for any of those small creatures that our opponents have. It can also be an aggressor, because for 1 red we can give it +1/-1 until the end of the turn, and we can essentially make it like a 4/1 if we want to, if we're attacking with it. So that's the great benefit of that. But also because we're playing the Fanatic of Mogis, it adds the devotion. We're going to play off of like Burning-Tree Emissary as well, which is going to give us a great deal of devotion as well. And then we can finish off with like Fanatic to give us a nice sizable X value, where X is our devotion, where it deals that much damage to our opponent. So Fanatic is great for being able to grind out those matchups where we can't be as aggressive because our opponent is playing other creatures, but we still have a very easy way to be able to solidify a win. We have Act of Treason against decks that are playing a little bit larger scale of creatures. Like if they're playing things like Blood Barons and they're playing things like Desecration Demons and Luxodon Smiters, we can use Act of Treason outside of using Mizzium Mortars to deal with like some of those cards. We can use Act of Treason, side it in, and we're going to be able to take our opponent's creatures and use them against them, especially if it means like going like the turn 1 creature, turn 2 Firefist Striker, turn 3 Act of Treason, just to be able to manipulate the way things are blocking again. It's another 3-drop threat that we can use to be able to smash our opponent with. But even like late game, it's just great to be able to use your opponent's things against them. The Mizzium Mortars are, again, for like the creature-heavy matchups, like especially when we're facing things like Luxodon Smiter, because it's an awkward card because Lightning Strike doesn't hit it. But we have the Mizzium Mortars to be able to deal with like those 4 toughness or less creatures. And if we do get to the point, for some reason, if we do have 6 lands, if we're just drawing lands on top of lands on top of lands, we can use the Overload for 6 to be able to get rid of all creatures that are 4 toughness or less. It's just going to deal 4 damage to all creatures that we don't control. And then the Hammer of Purphoros. The Hammer of Purphoros is for the control matchups, and the matchups that have a ton of removal, like anything like pseudo-control, we're going to side in the Hammer of Purphoros, because creatures we control have haste, which is great, but it's a 3-cost enchantment artifact that for 3 mana and tap is going to let us sacrifice a land and put a 3/3 colorless golem creature on the battlefield, and it's also going to have haste as well, so we're going to be able to swing in with it. But ultimately, being able to use that haste to our advantage will let us play like the majority of our creatures that don't already have haste at haste speed, and it's also going to allow us to make 3/3s to be able to bounce back from removal spells that our opponents have, and also things like Supreme Verdict as well. So ultimately, we get to have more threats against our opponent, and it only comes at the cost of sacking our lands, which definitely isn't even a problem for us. That's, like I mentioned, part of the reason why I went up to 22 lands in this type of a deck, whereas otherwise I would only be playing like 21 or 20 maybe. So ultimately, that is our deck for us. It's very cheap to make, and it is definitely very, very aggressive with how quick you can actually win with it. The suggestions that I would make for being able to swap things out as you get more expensive cards, really like the only thing that you really want to change out is probably Frostburn Weird for Boros Reckoner. It's definitely not like mandatory that you have to have them swapped out, but Boros Reckoner is very, very much better than Frostburn Weird, especially with like the Fanatic of Mogis. It's more devotion that you get to add in, but Boros Reckoner is great up against the aggro matchup, so you want to swap the Frostburn Weird out for Boros Reckoners first probably, and then I would swap out 4 Mountains for 4 Mutavaults. Again, Mutavault's another expensive card, but up against like the control matchups, it's another creature that you can attack. It gets to avoid like wrath effects and stuff like that, so it's good for that as well. But ultimately, it's like another creature that you can use that is also a land in your deck, which is pretty perfect. So that's the deck tech for us. Like I mentioned, the entire deck list is down in the description below where you guys can check it out, including the TappedOut.net link on there as well. And remember to like this video and subscribe for more Magic the Gathering content. And until next time, guys, peace out.